We are live streaming here on the Weather Network. Massive storm, a Colorado low impacting Ontario and Quebec, and of course areas stateside as well. Manitoba, you're in this too. We've got a little bit for everyone. We're talking about snow to the north, rain and thunderstorms to the south, even a tornado watch in southwestern Ontario, though we'll talk about that coming up. And of course, we've got the freezing rain as well. That has been a huge issue. We're talking about ice accretion, hundreds of thousands without power in places like Montreal, for example, in Quebec. Widespread power outages, and it's no surprise when you have hours and hours of freezing rain and ice accretion on branches and hydro wires, and then you add the wind, and all of a sudden everything comes crashing down. With me is meteorologist Rachel Modestino, and we're going to talk about this freezing rain. This is what we expected, Rachel. It's unfortunate when it happens, but this is a bona fide ice storm for some.
It really is, Kim. We're talking about multiple hours of ice accumulations. For Ottawa's case, that's into the 10-hour time frame. Now we're starting to see that warm sector begin to creep in. And when we're talking about the power outages, Hydro-Quebec has issued over 350,000 customers without power as of Wednesday afternoon. And it's because of what you just mentioned, Kim, all of that ice. Have a look at some of these visuals, the roads, they're really weighing on the trees. And like you mentioned, we really only need a little bit of wind to really cause havoc when we're talking about an ice event. So this is likely to persist for another couple of hours, and it's really going to make the evening commute quite terrible for sections of Ottawa and Montreal.
Yes, you know, we've been getting photos in almost nonstop on social media. This is one of the videos that we've been seeing out of Quebec, and just, I mean, for the people of Quebec and Eastern Ontario, they remember well the ice storm of '98. And for many of them, this is bringing back some very bad memories. We can see those branches and trees are down. Very scary situation. You don't want to be walking on the sidewalk when they're this slippery. Look at that ice, my goodness. And you know, some of these buds are just starting to come out. My cousin, who has a fruit tree in her front yard, it is gone now because of the freezing rain. This photo is something else. a little bit funny, I know, but my goodness, everyone doing the head through the frozen window trick, except now it's the dog. He's got to get his head out there. My gosh. But yes, you're making me laugh, but an ice storm is nothing to laugh about. And we're talking, as I mentioned, hundreds of thousands without power right now in Quebec.
And hundreds of thousands without power across southern Ontario as well. Our ground has been so saturated, and we've seen over 50 millimeters of rain for parts of the snowbelt regions as a line of training storms swept through Wednesday morning and into the afternoon. And also parts of the city of Toronto, especially in the west end. I'll show you what that looks like. The past 24 hours, seeing over 30 to maybe even 50 millimeters of rainfall. So we're really going to be watching for sections of the GTA Wednesday evening's commute. Could be quite treacherous in terms of a rainfall. Heavy amounts of rain still to come, and we've already seen a whopping totals in through Etobicoke, and our ground just really can't soak it up. So lots of pooling, localized flooding, urban flooding as well going to be in the forecast.
We're going to bring in our storm hunter, Mark Robinson, who has been out in this storm. As you can imagine, I doubt he slept much either, because we were talking about thunderstorms in the early morning hours. I know they woke me up and maybe frightened a dog or two as well. So I have this feeling that, Mark Robinson, you were not sleeping.
No, I got up at, I believe it was about 4:45 with the first rumbles of thunder hit. And yeah, I was bolt upright out of bed and got a few good lightning strikes in and around the area. That was round one of the storms. And it's just been sort of, you know, storm round after storm round over for the rest of the day. And I'm finally sort of watching the last of it beginning to push to the east. And I'm just driving down the 401 right now. Right now I am near Dutton, so that's west of London. and just getting onto the 401 right now for traveling back home. But I just want to show you, take a look at what you're dealing with for the commute in this last batch of thunderstorms. This is not severe thunderstorms. This is just a lot of rain falling, and of course a lot of this rain is on the watersheds. And I have been to a couple of towns where they've been talking about the fact they haven't seen this much water in quite a while, and they're a bit concerned about how much flooding they're seeing.
Yeah, hopefully not a lot. I know this commute is not easy. The commute home is going to be a slow one. There were plenty of accidents around southern Ontario. That's just because of the heavy rain. You get those trucks and all of a sudden you can't see anything if you're trying to get by one of them. And then there's the dark skies. Rachel, look at that sky. I mean, from about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it almost looked like evening or nighttime across southern Ontario. It's been so gray. It's
been a very active sky, stormy sky, and looking quite angry to say the least. Here's just a picture of the current conditions across the province of Ontario, especially the south and the east. You can see quite a temperature gradient. We're talking where Mark just was, sitting in the upper teens, but a couple kilometers away, a couple kilometers down the 401, Hamilton barely reaching single digits. So that sharp temperature contrast goes to show you the sharp dynamics that were at play across southern Ontario, and it's really diminished our tornado threat. So tornado watches that were in place through the afternoon have actually been taken away. We're just dealing with more so some severe thunderstorm watches and those rainfall warnings in place as of right now.
Yeah, and we think those severe thunderstorm watches will likely be dropped soon as well. I know people were looking at their app in Hamilton. It says, 13, 14, 15 degrees this afternoon. However, there's still a chance that for the evening and late night that this push of warm air will move its way in. It's not like you could have enjoyed that warm weather with all of this rain anyway, but it just stayed to the south, at least for most of the day, and we're expecting things to clear out nicely. But as far as Eastern Ontario is concerned, that's where a lot of the action is right now. When it comes to the ice, that is what has become the more serious of the situations. And of course, when we're talking about power outages, people are anxious to know when crews will be there. And apparently they are already on the job across Outaouais and the Laurentians and Montreal proper. They're at it, but of course it's a dangerous situation and it's going to take time. And sometimes with these kinds of ice storm events, it could be days before people are back online.
And it could be another few hours before that warm front really takes over that region that's highlighted in pink. And it's been highlighted in pink throughout Wednesday pretty much. So we're talking about lots of ice accretion, a bona fide ice storm, over 15 millimeters of ice accreting on most surfaces. And when that happens on the power lines, just a little bit of a gust of wind, that's what's caused hundreds of thousands without power. So that's likely to continue until that warmer sector inches its way through. But Kim, it does look like it's moving quite slowly and it may take a few more hours, maybe even lingering into the evening.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. I was talking about oh wow, the temperatures didn't warm up in Hamilton. That's okay. That's not a big deal. But if they don't warm up in Ottawa and Montreal, that's a huge deal, because it has been sitting below that freezing mark, and unless we get those temperatures up, it's not going to change over to rain. So this is not a great scenario, obviously, and I know from being at the Weather Network since the ice storm, the big one in '98, people are worried about this kind of thing. I know they've done a lot of improvements to the infrastructure in Quebec as a result of that ice storm, but I'm sure that it still makes people very anxious when they see something like this happen, and already people losing power. I mentioned over 300,000 in the province of Quebec, and that was as of about an hour or so ago. So I'm not thinking things are improving at this point in time. In fact, they're likely getting worse.
I think so, and also just want to point out, once this system makes its way through, we're going to continue to see gusty winds in this area. So that's going to just make matters worse. So although we may see this wrap up through the early morning hours of Thursday morning, Thursday is going to feature some gusty winds, so we could see additional power outages. They're really going to be testing the limits of Hydro 1 and Hydro Quebec with this Colorado low, and it has just been expansive. We're talking about an ice storm for much of Ontario and Quebec, severe weather across southern Ontario, and that severe weather has trickled all the way south into the Gulf of Mexico, where all of this moisture is steaming up from. So pretty much anywhere you've received precipitation, it's probably come in quite copious amounts.
You know, our sister station, Meteo Media, is in Montreal. Patrick de Belfoy is with Meteo Media, and he is their Mark Robinson. So he's been out in this storm all day, and he filed this a little bit ago. Let's take a look.
And that is just the beginning. A first band of freezing rain has already swept through the Laurentian. It's not very, very thick ice on the road, but because the tar is not really slick, well, all that little rain went in between the cracks. So it's still a bit rough, but very slippery. But if you check the paint in the middle of the road, this already had a slick surface. So when the freezing rain hit this, it became very slippery. So here in southern Quebec, we were forecasting a little more than 20 millimeters of freezing rain throughout the day and even into the evening. This is coupled with winds from 40 to 60 kilometers an hour from the north, keeping the cold air on the ground. For freezing rain, that's a very good recipe.
Yeah, tricky stuff. And that was a while ago. As we saw, you can't even really walk on that highway or that roadway. You'd be sliding right along it. So this is going to be very dangerous. I'm hoping that the people took heed. I know that the kids were not going to school today because of this storm.
Well, I'm very hope so too as well, Kim. I just wanted to show you what the winds look like in terms of the forecast, because that's what's really going to deteriorate conditions moving forward. It does look like calming conditions until we get into our Thursday. This is around your Thursday dinner hour. We're starting to see those winds pick up over 50 kilometers per hour for parts of Quebec. So just wanted to mention that. Also, those winds quite gusty indeed across sections of northwestern Ontario. That's where the center of the low is. The shores of Lake Superior, Wawa, and sections of the Trans-Canada Highway were getting battered with heavy snowfall. So the system really had it all.
Yeah, it was two different seasons, really. And that's what spring is. It's one of those battle seasons like fall. So it's winter and summer. Compilation of the storms that we saw through the day, and we'll start with the lightning. We had the hail as well. This is Guelph, so a lot of people were up early, including our Mark Robinson. So we get a lot of dark skies with the lightning. And look at this, contrast that with Winnipeg. This is the same storm. This is the same Colorado low that's bringing hail and lightning to southern Ontario, that's bringing snow to Winnipeg. Look at this in Kenora, just north of Lake Superior, heavy amounts of snow falling there. And Quebec, we've been coming back to you time and again because you are dealing with this freezing rain, this ice accretion. Quebec, eastern Ontario as well, so Ottawa, the Ottawa Valley. I know punching out the ice of the window is fun, but I don't want to drive anywhere. I wouldn't if I were you. Aylmer, Quebec, Amelie sends this video in, and so many of those smaller trees too, losing their branches, and you may be losing trees altogether as a result of this particular ice storm.
And not only that, we could also see that risk trickling across southern Ontario because, like we mentioned, that flooding threat, lots more rain still to come. Here's what the radar had looked like the past couple of hours. We've seen the storms making their way through this evening really diminished in terms of lightning when we compare it to what we saw throughout the morning, which woke me up, by the way. But we can see a line that's made its way through the GTA. So if you're gearing up for your commute, maybe just wait another 30 minutes because this should clear out. It's a cold front that's beginning to lose steam. But if you're commuting for parts of the Niagara Peninsula, your best bet is probably to head out sooner rather than later because this cluster that's made its way from Windsor will be trickling into your area. But I do want to touch on the lightning, Kim, because like I mentioned, not a lot going on currently. This system's beginning to lose steam, but have a look at how much we've seen so far this Wednesday. We even saw during that ice event in eastern Ontario and southern Quebec, they weren't just dealing with the ice event, but they were dealing with freezing rain and thunder.
Wow, just everything all at once, right? My goodness. Yeah, so this is showing what happened with lightning. But the thing is that the Great Lakes are really storm killers this time of year when it comes to convective storms. I mean, we certainly have had our fair share of thunder snow this past winter, but this time of year, you're less likely to see a tornado, although we did have the tornado watch on that slight risk that we may have seen one. Certainly they were seeing them stateside, but once they get into this cooler air mass, things have died down significantly, and a lot of people are obviously breathing a sigh of relief. So we did have the energy for thunderstorms. We certainly saw them in the early part of the day, but as we got into the later afternoon, it looks like things are dying down as far as any risk of tornadoes.
Yeah, it's more so going to pivot into focusing on that freezing rain for commuters across Ottawa and into parts of southern Quebec. Still in freezing rain warnings for majority of the Laurentians as well. So that looks like that will persist into the evening commute, and then it will be the rainfall warnings. The rainfall is going to be a problem across the GTA, especially for commuters up the 400 through to Barrie, even if you have to head even more north into Midland or east. That's where the heavier rainfall is going to continue to remain. Taking a look at how much, what totals we can see, well, a lot of this has already fallen, and it's going to be coming in very localized amounts with this line of thunderstorms. So maybe a widespread risk of additional 10, maybe 20 millimeters since, like you mentioned, Kim, these storms are beginning to lose steam, so they'll be losing out a bit of their extra oomph as well through the evening.
I don't know about you, Rachel, but I find it can be almost as dangerous to drive in heavy rain as it is to drive in heavy snow. I mean, sometimes visibility can become very poor in a very short period of time, especially around those trucks. Any kind of pooling on the road, you can have hydroplaning. One of our coworkers had that happen to her today. Thankfully, she's okay. But you can easily spin out if you hit one of these puddles, and especially at a high rate of speed. I mean, the 401 corridor, the QEW, this can be very, very tricky. And if those wipers aren't great either, then you're in even more trouble. So heavy rainfall, tricky on the roads, take it slow. Don't drive if you don't have to. Some people don't have a choice, but it's not just the freezing rain and snow, although those are two very dangerous kinds of precipitation as well. And I'm hoping that we're going to get to Patrick de Belfoy soon. I feel like we're going to have him soon enough. Oh, we've got him? Oh, not yet. Okay. I kind of see him here, but he's not quite ready for us, but that's okay. We'll get to him in a moment. But we're looking here at the radar and such widespread precipitation. And if you're not really sure what you're looking at, the pink is the freezing rain. The yellows and the reds, that's heavy rain. And then to the north in the blue, that is the snow with this system. And boy, it's just bringing it all today, Rachel.
It really is. I do want to check out the snowfall too, because that's going to be bringing, that's making its way to a finale for parts of Quebec City. But then areas in through Quebec City, they're going to be gearing up to see that freezing precipitation, Kim. So they really just saw snow for the most part, having a lot more cold air. But it's going to begin to push in that freezing rain threat. So we'll see some snow, maybe some icing on top of it. I would not want to be out in Quebec City shoveling that one. I'd much rather be down here dealing with the rain. But like you mentioned, still going to be extremely tricky in terms of your commutes, especially along the 401 sections of the QEW. Be extra careful because some of the roadways could have already experienced pooling. We did see areas across southern Ontario measure over 50 millimeters of rainfall, and then likely very difficult commutes in through the Ottawa Valley as well. Very significant icing event.
We have Patrick de Belfoy from Meteo Media, who has been out in the ice all day long in the Montreal area. Patrick, I can see that there are trees down behind you. I know you've been through ice storms before. Tell us a little bit about this one, how it compares.
Well, this actually started very early in the morning. We started having freezing rain. Maybe not that much, but suddenly, I would say around noon, the bigger, heavier bands of freezing rain showed up over Montreal. Now, the thing happens is that the roads are not that bad. They're not that slippery. They were slippery before, and the sidewalks were also very treacherous before. But it's the accumulation of ice on the structures and on the tree that now causes problem. So when you walk on the streets, on the sidewalk, there's always ice falling left and right. And as you can see, some of those big big branches also broke because of that ice. Now, it's nothing compared to the ice storm of 1998, though in southern Quebec, when you mention freezing rain, everybody remembers that moment because that was just atrocious. But if we compare this freezing rain episode to the last one we really had that was okay or to be mentioned, I would say in 2019, we have right now more people without electricity than we had in 2019 in the other event. So now we're going around 350,000 people without electricity, and of course it's the branch are falling on the wires, and that does that. Now this is Montreal and south of Montreal, but when we go to the Laurentian, which is hilly, it's in the mountain, we went there this morning. There was also an episode of freezing rain. It quickly turned to ice pilot, but the episode of ice pilot was quite important, and as you might know, it takes a lot of humidity to make ice pillet, a lot more than to make freezing rain. So a lot of precipitation when they fall under the form of ice pellets, it doesn't make as much accumulation. But in the Laurentian, they had a lot of ice pillet. There is still possibility of freezing rain over the next few hours. You've mentioned a little earlier that in central Quebec, so the Quebec City has only snow, but they could change also to have a little mix at the late in the day, just before the sun sets.
We appreciate your insights on this, Patrick. I know you've been out in this messy stuff all day long. I'm just going to ask you one more quick question since we're live and we've got you here. Were people prepared for this? I know that schools were closed, but do you feel like that the people of Montreal and in Quebec took heed before this storm showed up?
I think so. I think they were ready. Just the fact that there was, like this morning when the day started, there was already more than 700 schools that was closed, that had decided to close today. And that's a sign. It's not because there's a lot of dangers on the road or a lot of dangers on the sidewalks, but they usually close because there is dangers for school buses, or even in their yard. Kids can go out and play because there's this much ice and they can slip and hurt themselves. That's usually why they close the schools in advance. In this case, that's exactly what happened. Now, a lot of places also say we might not even be able to open tomorrow because of wires that are down, or because the schoolyard is still very, very icy and they wouldn't have time to clear it up. But I think people were prepared in the sense that the minute, and it's probably the same thing for Toronto, but in Montreal or in southern Quebec, the minute you close schools, there's like half of the people on the roads anymore are gone.
Right.
So there was not heavy traffic because schools were closed. People were, yes, prepared because, oh, the school is closed. I got to find a plan B, which is usually work at home or in some other ways. So I think, yes, they were prepared. But I think when they see stuff like this, that's a big reminder of the 1998 ice storm. And that's really still, after like 25 years, still very fresh in our memories.
Yes, no kidding. 25 years just goes in a flash, as I know.
At my age, yes.
And mine. Okay, Patrick, try to get a little warmer. I know you're soaking wet and you've been out in this all day, but we appreciate that you came on with us.
Pleasure. Take care.
Take care. We are live streaming this Colorado low. Rachel Modestino. I have this ice accretion board. Let's talk a little bit about it. Maybe we can bring it up full and talk about what certain amounts of ice means when it comes to power outages and that kind of thing. So again, 10 to 30 millimeters, that's what we're talking about here. Can we bring this up? I'm not sure. Tree damage and long-lasting outages, and that's what we're talking about with this particular storm.
And honestly, Kim, it does look like we do have a couple more hours of that icing. So some areas like the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, they've accumulated 10 millimeters. So you're really pushing into that second level now, the 10 to 30 millimeters. So into the parts of Montreal, moving into the tree damage, long-lasting outages. And Kim, this ice is not only confined to parts of eastern Ontario and southern Quebec, but it will also be moving into the Maritimes. Now, parts of the Maritimes experiencing snowfall to start. So currently, much of New Brunswick and into Nova Scotia, the snow has pushed in. But throughout your Wednesday overnight, that's where the chance for the freezing rain is going to really build. Maybe another round of 10 hours of icing. And then that also pushes into parts of Newfoundland too in the later parts of your Thursday. So more icy precipitation, and it will continue to move east. We'll likely see power outages and very similar setup that's going on across sections of Quebec moving into the east coast.
Yeah, it's good to give people in Atlantic Canada heads up that this is coming their way, and obviously they're going to see a mix of precipitation like has been going on in Ontario and Quebec. But this freezing rain, I think people are going to be talking about it for a while. As Patrick was saying, it's not as bad as 98, but it's worse than the last freezing rainstorm they saw, or ice storm they saw, with more power outages this time around. When we're talking about 350,000 people, or at least customers without power, that is significant. And so it means, like, you know, obviously a lot of people are going without right now, and that's a problem. But I mean, this is why we talk about being prepared ahead of an ice storm, right? Making sure that you have everything in order in case you do lose your lights, in case, you know, you can't, your fridge goes warm or that kind of thing. At least it's cold enough in many places that you shouldn't be losing your food at this point. If you can bring it outside, put it in some snow. But it becomes a real problem, especially if it lasts more than just a few hours.
It does look like some parts of the shores of Lake Superior also dealing with some freezing rain, and this is the area that saw lots and lots of snowfall, so a little bit of warmer air pushing in through sections of Highway 17, Highway 11, Thunder Bay through to Marathon. And have a look at the lightning too. It's still quite convective, so you're seeing quite a freezing drizzle mixed in with some rumbles of thunder. It's a very interesting system that stretches from Winnipeg all the way into Atlantic Canada, so that's its width, but then all the way south into the Gulf states along that cold front there. And there are severe thunderstorm warnings and watches stateside, as well as some tornado watches as well. But those are going to be confined to the states where we have that warmer air and better dynamics. But portions of Canada, we are dealing with that push of moisture across the south. And like we've been mentioning, that ice storm that's been going on across eastern sections of Ontario, southern Quebec, and then will be beginning for parts of the Maritime provinces, starting to creep into areas of southern New Brunswick currently.
In southern Ontario, started the day with thunderstorms and hail. Our Mark Robinson, storm hunter, has been out in it. Things are dying down now, but we're going to check in with him. How's the drive, Mark? Tell us some of the more interesting things that you may have seen today.
You know what, right now the drive is very just flat, gray, rain. I'm headed east, almost into London, and I can tell you, this is not the easiest driving, so I'm being very careful here. But the earlier in the day, we actually had some structure. I finally saw some half-decent structure in the storms, because what you're seeing right here, this sort of gray, is kind of what winter storms look like. Very flat. They're not very structured. You don't have a really amazing cloud, looking cloud to it. But of course, when you get into convective thunderstorms like we have in the summertime, you can get some amazing looking, just unbelievable sculptures of wind and water. And I finally saw just a little bit of that today.
Yeah, I have a picture of it behind
we
me
had
right
a
now.
shelf cloud right around Petrolia.
Yeah, we're gonna bring up that picture full.
That's that Petrolia storm.
Yeah, there it is. There's a look at it right now. Yes, pretty impressive for this early in the season, Mark. We knew that there was a slight risk of some very severe weather in southwestern Ontario. It did not materialize because we also know that there are a lot of variables in southern Ontario that would kill a big storm.
Absolutely, and I think one of the big issues that we had at this time of year is the lakes. We definitely have, that cold, stable air sitting over top of the lake because they're very cold. I mean, we're talking about it just, switching over from winter towards spring, so they haven't had a chance to warm up yet. So any storms that begin to push into there, get into that stable, cold air and tend to die off or turn into what you're seeing right now, which is just this sort of gray bleh. But I did, the one interesting thing about this one right now is we're seeing lightning. I just saw lightning. Now everybody likes to call this sheet lightning, and that's fine. But actually, all that it really is a bolt in between the cloud, from cloud to cloud, and so you don't see that big spark. Instead, what you're just seeing is the flash of the light. So it looks like a big sheet, but actually, it's still a bolt up there, and that's what I've been sort of watching as I've been slowly making my way along the 401 into London and eventually back home.
Well, thank you, Mark. Love the update from you. We picked up, Rachel picked up the radar showing the lightning just to illustrate what you were talking about. We'll check back in. Let's talk about this rainfall, Rachel, because I mean, we expect April showers, but this is a little more than that.
It really is, and this is coming off of back-to-back months where the city of Toronto has already seen above average rainfall, and we've seen above average snowfall for our entire winter. So that just paints the picture ahead of this very soggy system that our watersheds are already at high capacity. So once we saw this system make its way through, bringing in that tap of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, we kind of knew our alarm bells were ringing a little bit here in the forecast center about the risk for that very heavy rain and some localized flooding. So pooling along the roadways, I'm sure my backyard is going to be quite pooling as well, like it was with the last event beforehand. But you can see that stream of moisture. I'll zoom out to show you where it's coming from, that Gulf of Mexico, and that's also what's helped to fuel quite a warm up across southern Ontario. We saw the first 20-degree day of the year in Windsor, and furthermore, we're going to see more rainfall to come, but like we were mentioning, it's more so just some shower activity. The threat for severe thunderstorms definitely diminished as we made our way through today.
That's good. I think a lot of people are relieved to know that the most severe weather has passed, at least for those in southwestern Ontario. It was the first tornado watch of 2023. It will likely not be the last. I'm sure by the time we get into those summer months where they're much more frequent, we'll see them again. And as you mentioned, the first 20-degree day, but such a disparity in temperature, such a difference between what was going on in southwestern Ontario temperature-wise. You just go up a little bit towards the GTA and temperatures were in the single digits, but some places were obviously getting that warm push of southerly Gulf air.
They really were, and it was just confined to the immediate southwest of the province. But the problem was that air was coming over the very cold waters of the Great Lakes. So the wind coming off of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario was a lot colder than normal. And when we're talking about rain as well, got to shout out Wyerton up through the Bruce Peninsula, the wettest April day that they've ever recorded, and that was mostly through the morning hours with training thunderstorms that went through the region. They were hit with probably the best dynamics for the severe thunderstorms. Lots of lightning and heavy downpours, over 50 millimeters of rain that came in quite a short time span. So that is all going to be more so wrapping up for areas across Wyerton and north of the city of Toronto. We can see a little bit more still to come for folks across the Lake Erie shores and maybe making their way into Hamilton as well. So just touching on some commutes, sections of the 401, Highway 3, the QEW, Hamilton through to Niagara Falls. That's where we're going to be seeing that red and orange coloring. That just means we have a little bit higher cloud tops and it's raining a little bit stronger.
You know, speaking with Cam Linwood from the Grand River Conservation Authority, there was a flood watch in place and they were anticipating again more rain with this. Not a warning at this point. The reservoirs are in good shape, so they feel like they can handle this, but of course it can be very dangerous because these rivers, including the Grand, will be rushing and they'll be high, they'll be fast, the banks will be slippery, so it can be a very dangerous situation. I'm going to bring in the compilation of videos that we had through the morning hours and part of the day, because so many people, plus our own reporters, getting video of thunderstorms, freezing rain, snow, hail. We had it all today, Rachel. Let's take a look.
Wow, these are quite compelling videos. And honestly, it was the skies for me. The skies were so angry today. It really gave us the hump day vibes, I would say. It woke me up in the middle of the night, and I just was fascinated. Anytime I looked up, I saw those flashes of lightning. But it wasn't just that. For folks that are in Winnipeg and northwestern Ontario, it was quite a bit of snowfall. We're talking about 15 to 30 centimeters of it. And then smack dab in the middle, there's that ice that we're discussing. And actually, Kim, we do have an update. The Hydro Quebec has now issued over 500,000 outages across Quebec. So this exceeds the derecho event that we saw that made its way through in terms of power outages. So that has really jumped in the past 30 minutes that we've been live here.
Yeah, 500,000, that's a lot of people. We expect that this number will go up. It's going to take crews some time to get to these structures and to fix them, and that means people need to be patient. I'm only hoping that people were prepared for power outages. We knew this was coming, and we knew that this could likely be the scenario, especially when we're talking about hours and hours of freezing rain. It's one thing to get freezing rain for an hour or two. It slicks up the roads. It can be potentially dangerous for drivers and people walking. However, when you get hours and hours and the ice accretion on branches and hydro wires, that's when it becomes a longer term issue.
It really does, Kim. So I'm thinking that this ice event for Quebec might push into maybe the top 2 ice events for April. It's all because of the warm front. It nosed in a little warm layer, like a cold air sandwich with the warm air being the meat, the star of this event. And it was all also due to the direction of that warm front. Instead of pushing its way up the St. Lawrence, it actually just kind of slided east, and it's going to continue to slide into sections of the Maritimes as well. So folks across the East Coast just getting started. Meanwhile, a lot of the severe weather activity is going to begin to wrap up for Southern Ontario.
Yeah, at least we can deliver a little bit of good news here, Rachel, with that fact. Ontario is going to be calming down in the south, the east, a different story altogether as that freezing rain continues. And as you mentioned, over 500,000 people without power now in Quebec with this. And then we can see that front layer of snow. So when you're seeing snow with a system like this, it is going to be heavy, wet snow. It's going to be difficult snow to shovel. And of course, then people can get into trouble as well. If you're not in great shape and you're shoveling heavy, wet snow, it can lead to something like a heart attack. You can put your back out, that kind of thing. So just be careful with this kind of event because of the sheer amount of moisture that's associated with that snow. Snow, freezing rain, thunderstorms too, a couple of lightning bolts hanging on here, Rachel, but it's certainly dying down in comparison to what we saw just a few hours ago.
Yeah, it's going to be an issue more so with the, how much moisture is going to be on the roadways and driving, really kicking that up, especially if you are behind any semis. Just give them a little bit of extra room. The good news with this is that the winds don't seem to be very strong, what you would expect maybe with a storm like this. But because it's dissipating, it's just taking up quite a bit of room, quite a bit of real estate across sections of Canada and all the way down into the States. So biggest worry is just going to be take your time along the roadways across Southern Ontario because of this. Here's a look at what Mark's dealing with.
Yeah, Mark, you're still as gray as ever. How's your drive going?
It's going. You know, Kim, this one is, it's not necessarily white knuckle driving where you can't see anything and you're, doing 30 kilometers an hour. Instead, this is a bit of a grind. So it's just kind of gray, you just try to drive along. There's not a lot of shape or anything to the clouds above. Everybody's moving at a fairly decent pace. But, I get on behind some of these semis. You can see off to the left there, and I'm getting just a little bit of, blowing up against the windshield, which makes it that much more difficult. So this can be an exhausting drive. And I think what happens is you don't realize how tired you are because you're just constantly paying attention until you've done this for a couple hours, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'm a lot more tired than I originally expected.
Yeah, and you're not getting any of that bright sunshine to help wake you up. It's, you're tired because you're concentrating, you're stressed, and then there's no blue sky to kind of pick you up at all. This is actually making me want to book a vacation somewhere sunny and warm, even though it's not exactly freezing. But man, that is a drudge of a drive.
Yeah, no. The one thing I'm going to say, though, is I'm quite happy to have this as opposed to, say, I don't know, 40 centimeters of snow falling, because I'm all done with winter. We're all done with that now. I have put the parkas away. I have pulled out the Rain-X for the windshields, and I'm getting ready for the thunderstorm season. So that part of it's okay. But to be serious, if you are doing the drive from London area towards the GTA, those storms are moving to the east fairly quickly, which means that you probably won't get out of them if you're driving east. If you're driving west, you'll probably punch through them fairly quickly. So it'll be a bit of a drudge to get through it on the way down. But if you're down by Chatham, it should be you're going to be back into clear air. But if you're going east, this is just going to follow you all the way up to the GTA, and you probably won't get out of it. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a haul for me.
Yep, Rachel's showing an excellent example of exactly what you're talking about right now with the radar circling the area that's in the heavy rain. And if you're driving east, what a problem that would be. That's our storm hunter, Mark Robinson, and you can feel the depression with that sky. My gosh, Rachel. But the good news is, Mark Robinson did say that he has put away his parkas for the season.
We should ask him if he's taken off his winter tires. That would be maybe bold, but we do sometimes see snowfall across the GTA. We're still April 5th, so I don't know. I think I have taken my winter tires off. How about you, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to wait just a little bit. I have seen an ice storm in April before, an ice pellet storm, and I was glad that I had my winter tires on then. So I will wait a little bit, but I know that we're going to get into a surge of much warmer weather when we get into next week, which is good news. But those who are in northern Ontario or in eastern Quebec, I'm hoping they still have their snow tires on, because it is indeed snowing.
Yeah, it is, and icing, quite a mix. So if you're driving this evening, what you can expect is changing weather conditions and changing temperatures. I'm sure Mark is sitting in London with his sweater on, but when he gets out of the car and comes over to the TWN headquarters in Oakville, he's probably going to have quite a chill. We're sitting at the low single digits. Meanwhile, some parts of southwestern Ontario climbed to 20 degrees, but currently sitting in the upper teens. Through Ottawa, you can see 0 degrees there, and that's why we're fueling that ice storm, because the temperatures have really just hovered between that 0 degree mark with that warm air, allowing for the rain or the snow rather, to melt higher up before freezing on contact. This is just another look at the ice accretion, 10 millimeters in through Montreal Olympic Park, and over 50,000 without power across Quebec.
Yeah, we're at we're at 500,000. Is that it? 570,000 right now, more than the derecho, which was back in the summertime, knocked out power for hundreds of thousands as well. At that point, it's difficult when you lose power, especially in the winter, and we're hoping that it won't be long for folks. But with this kind of widespread ice storm, it's going to be a while before crews can get out there and get people back online. And I mean, the only thing you can do is prepare ahead of time. At this point in time, I know that there are little things that people can do, like if you keep your freezer shut, do not open it for any reason, and things can last over 24 hours, not a problem. As long as you're not opening and shutting, you should be okay for a little while at least. And it's cool enough outside too for most folks in that area that they should be okay as far as keeping food from spoiling. I know that's a big issue when it comes to losing your power, but there's so much more to it as well. Like, flashlights, obviously. People, I think, have generators in Quebec after the 98 ice storm. So I think they probably have those running as well. But with people, working from home, kids staying home, and then not having power, that's a problem.
Yeah, it is. So take all of that advice if you're in Atlantic Canada, because you're next for that warm frontal mess. As you can see, that's pushed its way across that icy region. Just going to go into a little bit of forecast to what we can expect going forward throughout this evening. We will maybe see a little bit of push of some rainfall across Ottawa and Montreal, but honestly, it's so close, Kim. It could even just fall as some freezing drizzle, so we may not even escape it as we head into the evening. I'm really crossing my fingers that that warm air is going to make its way through. This is around your 7 7, 8 o'clock hour, but more likely going to be pushing in for that region as we get into more so the overnight. Continuing with that freezing rain, we're going to see that push into parts of the St. Lawrence, up the St. Lawrence through to Quebec City, and then you can see that really lingering over parts of New Brunswick, so extreme southwestern parts of New Brunswick, gearing up to see that freezing possibility. And you can see it just sliding and almost constant before that rainfall really kicks in, waking up for your Thursday morning, still questionable. So multiple hours of freezing rain on deck for the Maritimes once again. And not to count out parts of Manitoba and Ontario, still seeing snowfall. You can see that really wrapping around with this high resolution model. The biggest threat is going to be some blowing snow conditions, especially for areas like Wawa, the shores of Lake Superior, where those gusty winds are going to begin to kick up. A lot of that snow has already fallen. We could see an additional centimeters or two, but that banding is going to be quite difficult for areas just outside of Chapleau through your Thursday afternoon. And that's where we're going to see our gusty winds as well, widespread over 60 kilometers per hour. So blowing snow if you're heading up towards Highway 17 or the Trans-Canada, but clearing conditions Thursday afternoon across Ontario and Quebec.
And hopefully the road stays open. I mean, that's the only way to get from Ontario to Manitoba. I believe that's the only way. And a lot of trucks come up that way as well, people traveling from Ontario to Quebec. And that highway is often closed because of this exact reason. You get the winds coming off of Lake Superior, the bands, the lake effect squalls, and the fact that they are going to be so long lasting is going to be a problem. People are advised not to drive along the Highway 17 at all during this event.
Yeah, that squall that's coming off of Lake Superior looks quite juicy with this high resolution model here. So yeah, definitely take heed. Even though maybe some areas have cleared up, like where you are, always look at the weather where you're going. Because that can really rapidly change, because as we've seen, this Colorado low has really done everything: snow, ice, rain, some gusty conditions, power outages. So always look at where you're headed, because the weather conditions are going to continue to change this evening. But for folks in this region, it's going to be clearing up into Thursday morning.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's not clearing quicker in eastern Ontario and in Quebec as well. We would love for those temperatures just to bump up above that freezing mark. It's not happening, and that's what's going on with freezing rain. It's rain. It starts as snow, then it hits a warm layer, and then it's falling as rain, and then freezes on the cold surface, because it is frozen surfaces in eastern Ontario and western Quebec, and this is what happens when that freezing rain starts to accumulate. And that's what you get after hours and hours of freezing rain. You get 20, 30 millimeters of freezing rain, and now you're talking about millimeters, 10, 20 millimeters of ice accretion.
And just a simple gust, that's been the issue, is it's accumulating more so on the branches, the exposed tree limbs, and then they can really easily snap off with some of these wind gusts we've seen. They haven't been quite strong, but just enough in order to make for that widespread power outage risk. But for the GTA in southern Ontario, the winds have been not too bad, but like I said, just enough to maybe shake loose some of those tree limbs. And the ground is so saturated, it's really struggling to hold on to the trees there. The gusty conditions on and off through Wednesday or through Thursday and Friday afternoon, maybe over 50 kilometers per hour. But we're going to be talking more so about conditions clearing up, because we've pretty much seen a lot of the action already, especially as we compare it to what swept through the region this morning.
Yeah, and we're heading into a long weekend. The Easter weekend is coming up, and most of these areas in southern Ontario will see blue skies, little sunshine, nothing like what Mark Robinson has been dealing with nothing but gray skies in his drive. It's been pouring rain as well. He's seen a little bit of thunderstorm activity, but most of that has died down. I think we're going to check in with Mark as he drives along. He's not currently storm chasing because there's no real storm at this point to chase, but boy, it's messy. And it's a really good perspective, Mark, for those who are about to head out on the roads, at least in southern Ontario.
Yeah, Kim, the rain that's sort of falling, it's not a heavy rain. It's sort of it almost feels like kind of misty rain, but it's those rains that just soaks everything, and not fun to drive in because it's exhausting. You're just sort of watching this and trying to sort of pay attention. Lots of trucks on the highway, of course, as always. You're talking about the 401, one of the busier highways in North America. So yeah, anything that once you get into this kind of rain, add in that little bit of traffic and everything slows down, which is good. I mean, I don't want to see everyone going too fast with this kind of system. But the one thing that I've seen sort of throughout the day, Kim, was the flooding. I've been passing many farmers' fields, absolutely soaked. There are huge ponds on so many fields. When I was in Petrolia, lots and lots of flooding on the river there. So that river was way up and above. And the amazing thing is that it's actually come down from what it was a few days ago. You could see where the max level of the water was there. And that's a bit of an issue when we get down into that sort of that very flat area of southern Ontario, because the rivers there just sort of meander because there's not much elevation for them to really get going. So you just end up with these major flooding conditions. And I'm looking off to my left right now, and I can see a couple of fields, actually, and my right as well. And those fields are sort of underwater, and that's a big problem. I've got my fingers crossed that in the next couple of weeks things will dry up a little bit because the farmers really want to get out and start planting, and I want them to do that too because I like eating every day. I try to do it at least 3 times.
Yes, well, that's good. Yes, we rely heavily on our farmers, and boy, we have some great local food in southern Ontario, which is wonderful if we can depend on the weather. Now, once we get rid of this, Rachel, as you were saying, we're going to get into some drier weather. We have a nicer little stretch of it, at least, which is good to know. When we get back to back storms, that's when it becomes a real issue. But some of these numbers are really impressive. They
are. Shout out Wyerton. Rainiest April day of the year. And I'm not going to count out sections of the GTA too. Toronto sitting, downtown Toronto anyway, sitting 35 millimeters just west of Etobicoke, maybe over 50 millimeters. And that's falling on a very concreted urban area. So pooling, puddling is going to be a feature there, especially along the roadways. But like Mark was mentioning, the farmlands, quite soggy indeed. We're really at capacity across southern Ontario in terms of rainfall. We still have some to go. A lot of this has already fallen, but if we do see those thunderstorms or the storms that are making their way through towards the east, we could see an additional maybe 10-20 millimeters. And the regions that are under the gun for that is going to be more so the Niagara Peninsula. I'm looking at that cluster that Mark's driving through and through London. It's making its way towards the east. So Hamilton, sections of Niagara, the QEW, 401, maybe just south of Kitchener, gearing up to see some heavy rains. And then also east of the city of Toronto, along Highway 401, just outside of Oshawa through to Cobourg, seeing a little bit of that very showery activity. So we're still seeing a little bit more rain to go, but we are seeing a clearing on the backside of this cold front. You can see here the places that saw the most amount of rain up through the Bruce Peninsula finally getting able to breathe.
They can finally walk their dogs. Wyerton Willie can shake off all that rain in Wyerton. You know, the Great Lakes, sometimes there's a summer where we worry about the levels of the Great Lakes. That will not be this year. We have had significant precipitation through March. Toronto had more rain than Vancouver. So we're talking about that trend continuing now into April. So the reservoirs are in good shape. The lakes are in good shape. We have to worry about the other side of things, that, you know, too much rain, too much in the way of reservoirs overflowing, for example, and then we get into flooding situations. So as long as things calm down for a little bit, Rachel, we should be in good shape. But I mean, if we continue to see storms like this, it's going to be problematic.
Well, I think the bulk of that came throughout our early part of Wednesday. We had quite a juicy environment, and that's why we did see tornado watches in place. But just to update the viewers, no tornado watches, no severe thunderstorm watches or warnings, more so just the rainfall. So the localized flooding, the urban flooding going to be a feature, pooling along the roadways. And we still have the freezing rain warning stretching just north of Parry Sound all the way through into Ottawa and parts of southern Quebec, even into the Maritimes as of now. So
wow.
Fredericton, St. John, and also Halifax are included in that warning. That stretches probably over 100 or 1,000 kilometers long.
We're going to bring in some video to show you what that looks like in real life. It's one thing to look at a freezing rain warning map. It's another thing to see the repercussions of ice accretion, heavy freezing rain over several hours. This is the scene in Montreal, and this will be widespread across parts of Quebec and Eastern Ontario where there are trees littering the streets. That's going to be a problem for people trying to get around. So first you're dealing with ice. Maybe you take the time to scrape off your car. That takes a half an hour. And then you're trying to get off your street, but you can't because there may be a giant branch across the road or other, or something worse. And add to that the sheer amount of people without power. At last count, 570,000 customers in the province of Quebec. That is going to take a while before crews can get everybody back up and online. So, I mean, I have been in a situation where we've been out without power for a while, and I know how frustrating it can be. You can't do anything, and especially if you have young kids, they say, well, can we just watch a movie? No. Can we play a video game? Still no. Nothing. You can't do anything without power, and hopefully people have generators or at least have prepared for this. And if it's a few hours, it's not a big deal, usually, Rachel, but then again, if it's more than a day or two, it can become a real issue.
Yeah, and when we are looking at the rating of the ice accumulation, we're into like the 10 to 30 millimeter range. So we're talking about long-lasting outages as a possibility. And these are the updated numbers, Kim. I just want to show you and the viewers over 600,000. So that squashes the power outages we saw with the Derecho event last year through May. I remember that one well. It does look like we're going to still see a few hours of ice accretion. The biggest threat is going to be on the trees, the exposed limbs, the power lines, I'm sure are weighing quite heavily with over 10 millimeters of ice, the hardest hit regions there. So this ice storm is definitely what we had the most confidence in, and probably one of the most severe weather that we've seen with this event.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen anything like this in quite some time, Rachel. We've certainly had freezing rain warnings throughout the winter time, but to have a storm where we're talking about hours and hours and hours of freezing rain, that's unique. And it's April. People want to say goodbye to winter weather. This is not atypical for winter. I mean for spring, this is a typical scenario. But I think that people are just done with this kind of weather. And to think again, they might be losing power, or they have to scrape their cars, and their kids aren't going to school because of the weather. All of this is very much a winter scenario, but this is a storm where winter and summer are battling it out with that heat in the south, those temperatures hitting 20 degrees for the first time in Canada this year. Windsor, Ontario, couldn't really enjoy it. It wasn't exactly pleasant weather to go along with that 20 degrees. So we're certainly seeing signs of summer in the southwest, and even with a tornado watch, the first of the season, but winter does not want to let go easily, and that's why we're continuing to see heavy snow in some areas and freezing rain as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit of growing pains getting into the summer months, because this time of year our sun angle is not as strong as what it will become through summer. So we can't really manifest this 20-degree heat, even upper teens, by ourselves. What we need is a push of moisture, and that's exactly what we got. You can see here that slug of moisture coming up from the Gulf of Mexico. It brought all of our heavy precipitation, but also the warm up. So it's kind of a trick. If you look at your forecast, the temperatures don't really tell you the full story. I'm sure some people across Windsor were saying, hey, 20-degree day, 20-plus degree day in the forecast, like I'm going to get out and enjoy it. But little did they know that that comes at a cost. The severe thunderstorms were an issue with tornado warnings, or tornado watches rather, this afternoon. Everything has been diminishing, will continue to diminish through our evening commute, but just take your temperatures with a grain of salt moving forward throughout this month of April, because if you see that warm air, it's likely to be accompanied by those April showers.
Yeah, we can't have it all. We can't have our cake and eat it too, apparently. If it's going to be warm, it's going to be volatile. But temperatures are cooling in the next couple of days. But then you'll have much calmer, a more stable air mass in general, lots of sunshine, temperatures not quite 20 degrees, but I think people can take that. You know, it's like, okay, I'll take the compromise of a little bit cooler, back to more seasonal values, the 7s and 8s, but I'll at least have some sunshine.
Yeah, I'll try to pull up the Toronto sunshine. I can't quite find it here, but it does look like we'll have more chances for that sunshine once the system makes its way through. Some high pressure in place for Thursday, so maybe it's more so the calm after the storm. But you can see that jet stream wants to funnel across areas in through the Maritimes throughout your Thursday. So we'll be checking to see if any of those strong wind gusts in the upper level make their way towards the surface, which could bring some damaging gusty winds.
Well, thank you very much, meteorologist Rachel Modestino. I'm Kim McDonald. You have been watching a live stream of this Colorado low as it moves across Ontario, Quebec, and eventually into Atlantic Canada. But we won't let you go. Keep watching us at the Weather Network on all of our platforms.